What is up, guys? Welcome to Barton. My name is Heinrich, and today I'm going to show you how you can use GitHub and Unity to protect your projects and improve your workflow. Here are some timestamps to different parts of the tutorial, so let's begin. First of all, what is Git? Git is a free and open source version control system. What that basically means is that it's a system that we can use to manage and track changes in our project, as well as keep records of those changes. To interact with Git, we're going to use GitHub. GitHub allows us to create and manage Git repositories. A repository can be thought of as the root project folder for your project. Now, in order to interact with our repositories, we can either use the command line or we can use GitHub's desktop client, as well as a lot of other different clients. Personally, I use the desktop client as I find it to be very user-friendly and very beginner-friendly, but you can use whatever you're most comfortable with. So now let's get into getting everything set up. The first thing we're going to need is Git. You can download Git at git-sem.com. The link will be in the description. On this page, you can just navigate down here to the download button at the bottom left. Download for Windows, or if you're using Mac, there should be a download for Mac as well. But just a little side note, I'm only familiar doing this on Windows, but I believe the process is very similar. So once you've downloaded and installed this, you can go ahead and come over to github.com, where we can then create an account. I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. This is your GitHub profile page. If you don't see this after you logged in, you can come up to the top right over here, click the little drop down and just go to your profile. There's a lot of information here that we don't really need. Our most important thing is this repositories tab. Here we will have a list of all of our repositories. Now the last thing we need to do to get set up is download GitHub Desktop, and you can get that from desktop.github.com. Again, just click the download button and follow the instructions. And then once you're done with that, we can get started. Okay, now that everything's set up, we can go ahead and create our first repository. So on github.com in our repositories tab, go ahead and click new. This will take us to the create a new repository window. We can start off by specifying a repository name. And as you can see, spaces are not allowed in the name for the repository, but GitHub takes care of that for us. Next, we can give the project a description. And then we can specify whether we want this repository to be public or private. If the repository is public, that means anybody can see the repository, but you can still choose who gets to commit to your repository. And we'll get into what a commit is in just a second. If you make a repository private, that means only you and the selected people that you choose can see the repository and commit to the repository. Next, we can choose to initialize the repository for a README, and the README is generally just to give extra information about the project. So let's just go ahead and tick that. Next, we have the option to add a gitignore file. Now what a gitignore file does is it makes Git exclude certain files that aren't necessary to be backed up. A bunch of meta files that get generated when you start the program and get deleted when you close the program, things like that. Lucky for us, GitHub has a predefined Unity gitignore file that we can start off with. Once you have all this filled in, you can just go ahead and click Create Repository. And there we go, we now have our first repository. As you can see, here are the files in the repository. We have our gitignore file and our README file. If we click on the README file, we can view its contents. And currently the README only has the project name and the description underneath. So yeah, that's it. That's our first repository. Now let's go ahead and take a look at commits. To demonstrate this, let's go ahead and edit the README file. After we've made this change, we can go ahead and scroll down and it'll give us the option to commit changes. Now what a commit is basically like saving your progress to the project to your repository. So it's saying I've made these changes and I want this to get added to the permanent record of the repository. So we can start off by giving the commit a name, and it has pre-generated update readme for us, which is a good enough name to start off with. And then we can optionally give it a extended description if there was more complicated things happening in the commit. We can just leave that empty in this case. Next, we have the option to commit directly to the master branch, or we can create a new branch. We'll get into this in just a second. For now, let's just go ahead and commit changes. As you can see, our README file now shows our change. This is going to be my first commit. If we go back to the root directory, so click on our project name up here, you can see that we now have 2 commits. If we go ahead and click on the commits button over here, we can see the history of our different commits. Over here we have the initial commit, which automatically happens when we create the repository. And over here we updated our README. And that's the basics of committing. So now that we've created this repository, let's talk about how we get this repository on our local machines. Let's go ahead and go back to the root project directory. And if we take a look at this green code button over here on the right, we have a bunch of different options. We can download the whole project as a zip, and over here it gives us the option to open with GitHub Desktop. Another thing we have over here is a URL, and we'll get into how to use that in just a second. So before we do anything with this, let's go ahead and open up GitHub Desktop. The first time you open it up, it's going to ask you to log into your GitHub account, and it'll probably also ask you for a name and email. But once you've done that, you should be greeted with a page that looks something like this. So over here, we have the option to clone a repository from the internet. If we click on this first tab, github.com, we have a list of all of our repositories if we're logged in. So over here, you can see we have our very cool game project repository. So our one option is just to click on this and then click clone. You also have to choose your local path, so where you want the repository to be. Another option we have is to use this URL, which is where this URL on this page comes from. So if we click on the green code button, copy this URL, and then paste that in here, we now have the option to clone this repository. Again, you have to choose your local path. I'm just going to leave it in my game dev folder. We can then go ahead and click clone. This will now get all the files from GitHub servers and create a local copy of it on our machines. This is the window you should see if you're currently in a specific repository. Up here at the top left, you can see current repository is very cool game project. Here we have two tabs. We have our changes and our history tab. Any changes we make to the project will show up over here. Alternatively, we can go to history to see all of our commits. So here we have our initial commit, and here we updated the README. Over here on the right, we can see the different changes that happened with these commits. And that's it. That's how you clone a repository from GitHub servers onto your local machines. Now let's talk about adding our Unity game to our folders. So if we navigate to our repository, so I have mine under Documents Game Dev, and over here I have Very Cool Game Project repository. If I open this, I can see my README and my gitignore file. This .git folder is used by Git itself, so we don't need to really worry about that. So now let's go ahead and create a new game that we want to be part of this repository. So go ahead and open up Unity, and then let's click New, and let's just give it a name. And then go ahead and under Location, choose your repository. We can then click Create. And as you can see, the next big thing has already been added to our folder, like it should. So once the project has been created, the first thing we want to do is come up to Edit, Project Settings, and then under the Editor tab, come to Version Control and set the mode to Visible Metafiles, and under Asset Serialization, set the mode to Force Text. You'll only have to do this once, but it's good to check every now and then. Now if we go to our desktop client, we should see all the files that have just been created. But as you can see, there's 3,795 changed files. And that's not correct, because as you can see, we still have a bunch of meta files in here that we don't want. There's just a whole bunch of unnecessary files. Now this has to do with how our gitignore file is set up. If we go to our repository, our gitignore file is currently expecting all of these folders to be at the same level. So what we can do is we could just move all of these one directory up so that they're on the same level. Another option that we have is to edit our gitignore file and just remove these slashes. If we go ahead and save that and go back to our desktop client, you can see the amount of files that have been changed or picked up as changes is only 23. These are all the important .asset files and doesn't include any of the unnecessary meta files. So now what we can do is commit this. So at the bottom over here, we give the name for the commit or the summary. And then we also have the option to give it a description. If we then say commit to master, we have now committed this change to our repository. So if we look in history, over here, we created a new project. Now it's important to note that this commit is only local to our machine. And if we head to GitHub, you'll see that none of these files have been added yet. And that's because we still need to push our changes to the server. This is indicated by this little up arrow next to our history. So in order to push our changes, we can just come up to this button over here where it says push origin, click that, and it'll push our changes to the servers. So now you can see the arrow is gone. And if we go back to GitHub and refresh, you can see our game folder has been added. We have our assets, everything we need. Perfect. Now let's say you already have a game that you want to put into a repository. The process is going to be very similar. If we go to our desktop client, we can go ahead and come up to File and say, Add a local repository. Now this Add Local Repository option is if you already have a repository on your machine that you just want to have GitHub Desktop pick up. But if we go ahead and choose our game folder as the repository, so over here I have my awesome tutorial series that you should totally check out. If we just click that and say select folder, it'll say this directory does not appear to be a Git repository. Would you like to create a repository here instead? So we can go ahead and click on that, and this will take us to create a new repository tab. This is the same thing that we will be greeted with if we were to just create a new repository with the desktop client instead of on github.com itself. So again, now we have the option to give it a name and a description. The local path will be locked because it's the folder that we chose. I'm not going to initialize it with a README this time. We can just go ahead and add our Unity gitignore file. If we then go ahead and click Create Repository and just let it do its thing, you can see that our current repository has now been changed to our awesome tutorial series. But there are no changes. That's because when we create the repository, it commits all the files as part of the initial commit. So as you can see, 409 files have been committed instead of 23 because this project is quite a bit bigger than a new Unity project. Now, if we go back to GitHub and we go to our repositories, which is just under your profile, there's a quick way to get there. You can see that this new repository is not part of the list. That's because similarly to having to push a commit, we need to publish a repository. So if we go back to the desktop client, you can see where we had the push button last time, we have the option to publish repository. So if we click that, it'll again allow us to give the repository a description. And over here, we have the option to keep this code private. If you untick this, it'll create a public repository. And if you keep this ticked, it'll create a private repository. So now if we say publish repository, and then go ahead and go back to GitHub and refresh this, as you can see, the awesome tutorial series that you should totally check out is now part of our repositories. Awesome. Now that's basically all you need to know to get started with Git, but I'm going to share some of my personal experience and how I work with Git in order to improve my own workflow and just to help keep our repositories neat and tidy. So the first thing we're going to talk about is branches. So if we go ahead and open up this awesome tutorial series that you should totally check out, you can see over here, it says master. This means that we are on our master branch. Now, generally, rule of thumb, you want the master branch to be a working version of your game. So when you make changes to your code, you're never making it on your master branch. So if we go ahead and open up this project in Unity, you can see here I have the latest working version of my game. Now I want to make some changes to this project. I'm going to go into the next stage of development and I'm going to add a third enemy or something like that. What I want to do is come down to GitHub, and up here at the top we can see our current branch. So currently it's master. We don't have any other branches yet, but we have the option to create a new branch. So we go ahead and click new branch. We can give this branch a name. Now there's a whole bunch of different standards for choosing a branch name. Again, if you're working by yourself, this doesn't really matter. And usually if you work in a team or for a different company, the standard will be given to you. What I like to do is give it the prefix proto, which means I'm busy prototyping something, and then a short description of what I'm prototyping. So let's just say we want to work on the character's jump. So I'll just say better jump. If we then go ahead and create branch, you can see that it automatically updated our current branch to proto better jump. Now, just like we had to publish the repository, we have to publish this branch. So we can click up here or on the right over here. Once that has been published, we can go ahead and come to GitHub. If we refresh this, you'll see there's two branches now. We have our master and we have our better jump. Now, let's go make some changes to our code. So let's just imagine I'm making some mad changes to my code. If we save this and then head back to the desktop client, you can see that it picks up our change. Over here it says we've added, wow, much code. So now when we commit this, we want to make sure we give it a descriptive title. Now I didn't actually work on the jump code, but we're just pretending over here. If we commit this and then push to origin, if we go look at our history, you can see that we have our initial commit and then we made changes to our jump code. Now, if we want to take a look at our working version of the game, we can go ahead and just on the fly change our branch to our master branch. When this happens, if we go ahead and look at the code, you can see that our change disappears. If we change back to our better jump branch, go ahead and take a look at the code, you can see that it's back. So this is what makes branches so nice. We can go ahead and just mess around with our code, prototype things, make it messy, without fearing that we're going to ruin our working version of the game. If we end up completely breaking things, we can just make a new branch. And then once we're happy with the things that we've created, we can just go ahead and put our changes back into master with a thing called merging. So let's go ahead and go make some more changes. And let's commit those changes. And then push it. And then let's make one more change just for good measure. We can now see that we have a nice history of commits on our branch. If we go ahead and look on GitHub itself, you can see that currently on the master branch, we have one commit. And then if we change this to our better jump branch, we have 4 commits. And over here, it'll tell us that this branch is 3 commits ahead of master. Now let's say we're happy with the changes that we made in our better jump branch. We want to add this back into master. So from the desktop client, we can come over to changes and we can come click on create pull request. If we click on this, it'll open up the browser again. And over here, we can give a title for the pull request. We can leave a comment. Again, these things are a lot more important when you're working in a team. You want the people reviewing your code to know what you did so they can know better what they need to look for. I'm just going to leave this as default and say create pull request. Now it's going to check to see if our code can be merged. It'll make sure that there are no conflicts. Over here, we can go ahead and look at the commits for this merge. We can look at the files that have been changed. We can look at all the changes this is going to bring into our project, which is pretty neat. So now let's just go ahead and click on merge pull request and then click confirm merge. Now it tells us that the pull request has successfully been merged and closed. That means all the changes that we've made in our proto better jump branch has been added to our master branch. We now have the option to delete this branch, but I generally don't. But it is a good way to keep things tidy. So if we go back to our code and we look at the master branch, let's go to our script that we changed. As you can see, the comments that we added to our code is now part of our master branch. Again, master branch is holding the latest working version of our project. So if we're going to make any other changes, we need to make another branch. Okay, now let's take a look at undoing mistakes. So let's go back to our desktop client and then let's create a new branch. We're going to call this melee attacks just for fun. Again, it's all just make-believe right now. And we can create our branch based on master. So we have the option to branch off of different branches if we wanted to, but we're going to keep it simple and just branch off of master for now. Once we've created the branch, don't forget to publish it. And let's go ahead and make some changes to our project again. Let's say this time we want to move our enemies around a bit. So I'm going to move enemy 2 over here instead. And now something to keep in mind is when using version control, it's good to commit as often as possible. The more commits you have for smaller changes, the better record of your history do you have, and the more precisely you can change things in the past if you need to. But it's not the end of the world if you write a whole script and only commit then. It's just good practice. So after having moved enemy 2, I'm going to come back to the desktop client. Oh wait, I need to save this. Come over here. As you can see, we've updated our main.unity file, changing the position of the player. Let's just go ahead and commit that. Don't forget to push it. And now let's say I move him again. This time I'm going to move him up here. Let's save that and commit again. Commit that and push it. Now going back to Unity, let's say, okay, I'm not happy with the color of my archer. Let me go ahead and change that. It'll be a bit excessive, and let's just make him completely red. If we save this and we go ahead and look at our desktop client, as you can see, the main.unity file has been updated again. But now let's say, oh, I didn't actually want to make this change. Now, instead of reverting the color over here, what we can do is in the desktop client, what we can do is just undo the changes over here. Now, if there's a bunch of different files, you can choose specific files to undo changes from, or if you just right click at the top over here, you can say discard all changes. It'll ask you to confirm that that's what you want to do. You can say yes. Now, if we go back to Unity, it'll detect that there's been a change. So we can just say reload. And as you can see, our archer is now back to normal. But now let's say we actually do want to change the color. Save that, go back to Git, and let's just commit that. And now we can push it. So now we currently have our archer standing at the top over here, and he is red. But now let's say again, oh, we actually did not want to make him red, but we've committed the changes. So how do we undo this without changing the color over here again? Again, pretend that the changes are a lot more complicated than just changing the color. What we can do is we can revert a commit. So if we come to our history, we have the history of all of our commits. At the top here, you can see we changed the archer color. If we right click on this, we have the option to revert this commit. What that means is it's going to take this commit and undo the changes and basically restore it to the state of the previous commit. So where we moved the archer again, but it doesn't delete this commit. So you'll see if we click revert this commit, we actually have another commit. This time it's called revert changed archer color. So this means even though we basically got rid of these changes, we still have a history of this change, which is pretty cool. So we go back to Unity, click reload. As you can see, our archer is back to the normal color. This is awesome. Now you'll see that this commit has not been pushed, so don't forget to push it. Now let's say we want to put the archer back in its initial position. We can again just come to our history and revert these to moved positions. So if we revert this commit and then revert this commit, you can see we now have two new commits that we can push. And then if we come back to Unity, reload, you can see the archer is back in the initial commit. So essentially, we are currently back to this initial commit. But yeah, hopefully I left you guys with a good starting point to getting used to using Git in your own projects to keep your work safe. You don't want to lose it when your hard drive inevitably breaks or when you accidentally write some bad code. If you guys would like me to dive deeper into things that we can do with Git, I would be happy to do so. So just let me know. Otherwise, if you're just looking to learn some more, I'll have some links in the description to handy videos with regards to using Git appropriately. So that's going to be all for now. I would just like to thank all of my supporters and wonderful people on Patreon, and a huge special thanks to Triac, Cody Lee, Pyro Says, and Miguel Gray. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.